The moment my husband looked me straight in the eyes and told me to stay home eating leftovers, while the rest of the family celebrated his promotion at a luxury restaurant, something inside me finally shattered. After nearly 3 decades of marriage, countless sacrifices, sleepless nights raising children alone, while he chased his career and years of quietly supporting every dream he ever had, I realized I was no longer seen as his wife. I had become invisible. "Don't forget to finish the pot roast in the fridge," Richard said casually, as he adjusted his expensive tie in the hallway mirror. His voice sounded light, almost cheerful, completely unaware that those simple words were about to destroy the last fragile piece of my heart. Behind him stood Jessica, my daughter-in-law, scrolling through her phone while smiling at something on social media. She wore a sleek black dress and barely glanced at me as she reminded Richard they were already running late for dinner at Capitol Grill. Apparently, the entire family was going to celebrate his big promotion together, everyone except me. I stood frozen in the kitchen, still holding the dish towel I had been using to wipe the counters after cooking dinner for all of them. The smell of roasted vegetables and gravy still filled the room, but suddenly, it made me feel sick. "You understand, right, Linda?" Jessica asked sweetly, though her eyes were cold. "This dinner is really for the people who've been part of Richard's professional journey." Professional journey. I almost laughed at the cruelty hidden inside those words. For years, I had been the one packing Richard's suitcases for business trips, calming him after stressful meetings, encouraging him after failed deals, and holding the entire household together while he climbed the corporate ladder. I sacrificed my own dreams so his could survive. But somehow, according to them, I wasn't part of the journey anymore. Richard didn't defend me. He didn't even hesitate. He simply checked his watch and called our son to confirm the reservation. "Your old man finally made it," he joked proudly into the phone while I stood only a few feet away, feeling like a ghost inside my own home. Then he leaned toward me and pressed a quick, distracted kiss against my cheek. "Don't wait up," he said before walking out the front door with Jessica. A few seconds later, I heard laughter echo through the garage before the car disappeared down the street. The silence afterward felt unbearable. I slowly opened the refrigerator and saw the container of leftover pot roast sitting neatly on the shelf with my name written across the lid in Jessica's handwriting. That tiny detail hurt more than I can explain. It was as if they had officially assigned me my place in the family, alone in the kitchen, eating leftovers while everyone else celebrated life together. In that moment, the loneliness hit harder than anger ever could. I finally understood that I had spent years shrinking myself to make everyone else comfortable, hoping someone would eventually notice my pain. But nobody did, and maybe they never planned to. If this story touches your heart, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more powerful family stories about betrayal, self-worth, and finding the courage to choose yourself again before it's too late. I kept staring at the container of leftovers long after the garage door closed behind them. The kitchen was completely silent now, but inside my chest, years of buried humiliation were screaming louder than ever. That tiny plastic container sitting in the refrigerator felt like the perfect symbol of my entire life. Cold leftovers carefully labeled with my name, while everyone else enjoyed celebration, laughter, and love, somewhere far away from me. I slowly sat down at the kitchen table, the same oak table, where I once helped my children with homework-wrapped birthday presents late at night, and listened to Richard talk endlessly about his dreams for the future. Back then, he used to look at me like I mattered. Back then, I believed we were building a life together. But somewhere along the way, I stopped being his partner and became part of the furniture. The worst part wasn't even being excluded from the dinner. It was how normal it had become for everyone. No guilt, no hesitation. No one stopped to ask whether leaving me behind might hurt my feelings. They simply assumed I would stay home, quietly clean the kitchen, and continue existing in the background exactly where they wanted me. My phone buzzed suddenly on the counter. For one foolish second, my heart lifted. Maybe Richard had realized how cruel this was. Maybe he was calling to apologize and ask me to join them after all. But when I picked up the phone, it was only a text from Michael. "Mom, can you make those lemon bars tomorrow for Liam's school event? Jessica says yours are the best." I stared at the message for several seconds before placing the phone back down without replying. Even now, the only value I had left to them was what I could do for everybody else. I looked around the kitchen slowly. Jessica's decorative candles sat perfectly arranged beside the sink. The curtains she picked hung over the windows. The expensive dishes she insisted on buying filled the cabinets I used to organize my own way for decades. Almost nothing in this room still felt like me anymore. 6 years earlier, when Michael and Jessica first moved into the house temporarily, I truly believed it would bring the family closer together. Instead, it slowly erased me piece by piece. Jessica took over the kitchen first, then family holidays, then decisions about the house, and eventually even Richard's attention. Every time I tried speaking up, I was made to feel unreasonable, emotional, or selfish, so eventually I stopped speaking at all. I walked upstairs quietly and stood in front of the bedroom mirror. For a long moment, I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. The exhaustion in her eyes looked permanent. The sadness around her mouth looked practiced. I realized I had spent years making myself smaller, so everyone else could feel bigger. Suddenly, I remembered something my mother once told me long ago. The saddest kind of loneliness is feeling invisible inside your own home. At the time, I didn't fully understand those words. Now, they felt painfully true. Downstairs, the refrigerator hummed softly in the darkness. The leftovers were still waiting for me exactly where they expected me to be. But for the first time in years, something deep inside me began changing. Quietly, slowly, dangerously. If you've ever felt invisible or unappreciated by the people you love most, comment the number 2 below. I want to know you're listening, and I want you to know you are not alone. At exactly 1:47 that night, while my husband laughed over expensive wine with the family who had slowly erased me from my own home, I quietly opened the closet and pulled out 2 old suitcases. My hands were calm, almost frighteningly calm, as if my heart had finally stopped fighting reality. There was no dramatic breakdown, no screaming, no shattered dishes crashing across the kitchen floor. Just silence. The kind of silence that only comes after years of emotional exhaustion finally hardened into clarity. Upstairs, the bedroom lamp cast a soft golden glow across the room Richard and I had shared for nearly 3 decades. I stood there for a moment, staring at the bed, remembering all the nights I stayed awake, waiting for him to come home from business trips, worrying about bills, comforting sick children alone, and convincing myself that sacrifice was simply part of love. But now the room felt unfamiliar, almost borrowed, like I was standing inside someone else's life. I opened the dresser slowly and began folding clothes with careful precision. Sweaters first, then jeans. Important documents followed: my passport, retirement papers, birth certificate, and the small envelope containing the inheritance my mother left me years ago. I packed only what truly belonged to me. The rest could stay behind with the people who no longer saw my worth. Every drawer I closed felt like sealing another chapter of my old life forever. Downstairs, the clock in the kitchen ticked loudly through the empty house. I sat at the oak table with a pen in my trembling hand and stared at the blank sheet of paper in front of me. For months, maybe even years, I had rehearsed this moment in my mind without fully admitting it to myself. But now the words came easily. Richard, by the time you read this, I will already be gone. I paused after writing the sentence, my chest tightening painfully. 27 years together reduced to a goodbye letter on the kitchen table. I explained everything calmly. No insults, no rage, just truth. I wrote about the loneliness, the humiliation, the years of slowly disappearing inside my own marriage, while everyone benefited from my silence. I reminded him how many dreams I sacrificed to support his success, and how deeply it hurt to realize I was no longer considered family enough to attend the biggest celebration of his career. Tears finally slid down my face when I reached the final sentence. I spent years making this house a home for everyone else while forgetting I deserved to feel at home too. I folded the letter carefully and placed it beneath the ceramic cookie jar Richard once gave me during happier years. The irony almost made me laugh. Then, I walked through the house one final time. I touched the hallway wall, where the children's height marks still remained faintly visible beneath layers of paint. I paused beside the family photographs lining the staircase. Smiling faces, Christmas mornings, beach vacations, birthdays. Looking at them now felt like watching memories from another woman's life. Finally, I picked up my suitcases and walked toward the front door. Outside, the cold October air wrapped around me as I loaded everything into my SUV. For one long moment, I looked back at the house, standing quietly beneath the streetlights. Once upon a time, it had been my dream. Now it felt like a cage. I had finally found the courage to escape. I drove away without looking back again. If this story moves, you please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories about family betrayal, self-respect, and finding the strength to reclaim your life before it's too late. Before my husband became a stranger sitting across from me at the dinner table before silence replaced laughter, inside our home there was a time when I truly believed Richard Thompson was the greatest thing that had ever happened to me. Looking back now almost hurts more than the betrayal itself, because the man I once loved so deeply no longer seemed to exist anywhere except inside old photographs and fading memories. We met in a crowded bookstore on a rainy afternoon when both of us reached for the same novel at the exact same moment. Richard laughed first and insisted I take the copy, but instead I offered to buy him coffee as a thank you for being polite. That simple conversation lasted nearly 3 hours. By the time we walked out into the cold evening air, I already felt like I had known him forever. Back then, Richard had this warmth about him that made people feel safe. He listened when I spoke. He remembered little details about my life. He asked questions about my dreams, instead of only talking about his own ambitions. I was teaching literature at a local high school, then completely in love with books, poetry, and the idea of building a meaningful life beside someone who truly saw me. Richard was still climbing the early steps of his career, working long hours in sales, while constantly talking about wanting to give his future family a beautiful life. We were young, exhausted, hopeful, and completely convinced love could survive anything. When we got married, we didn't have much money. Our honeymoon was only a short road trip through small mountain towns, and our first apartment had thin walls and terrible heating during winter. But I remember laughing constantly back then. We cooked cheap pasta dinners together at midnight, danced barefoot in the kitchen, while music played softly from an old radio, and stayed awake planning futures we were excited to grow into together. When our children were born, life became harder, but also fuller. Richard worked longer hours, trying to move higher inside the company, while I slowly reduced my teaching schedule to care for the kids. I handled school meetings, fevers, birthdays, scraped knees, nightmares, laundry, groceries, and everything else that kept a family running smoothly. At the time, I didn't resent it because I truly believed we were making sacrifices together for the same dream. Every promotion Richard earned felt like our success, not just his. I packed his suitcases before business trips with handwritten notes hidden between his shirts. He used to call me every night from hotel rooms just to hear my voice before falling asleep. Some evenings after the children were finally in bed, we would sit on the back porch sharing a glass of wine while talking about the future. Richard would wrap his arm around my shoulders and promise that one day after the kids grew up, we would travel the world together and finally enjoy the peaceful life we spent decades building. I believed every word. That's what makes the ending so painful now. Relationships rarely collapse in one dramatic moment. They erode slowly through neglect, distraction, and years of choosing convenience over connection. Somewhere between Richard chasing success and me trying to hold the family together, we stopped seeing each other clearly. I became the person who managed problems, while he became the person everyone admired. And little by little, the love story we once protected together quietly disappeared, without either of us fully noticing until it was already gone. If this story touches your heart, please take 1 second to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories about marriage, family, heartbreak, and finding your strength again after losing yourself for too long. The day my son brought Jessica home for the first time, I truly believed she would become another daughter to me. I remember standing in the kitchen nervously checking the robe lift in the oven while fixing my hair every few minutes, hoping she would feel welcomed and loved inside our family. Back then, I had no idea that the smiling woman walking through my front door would slowly take everything from me without ever raising her voice. Jessica arrived carrying a bottle of wine and wearing the kind of effortless confidence that immediately filled the room. She complimented my home, hugged me warmly, and spent the entire evening asking thoughtful questions about our family traditions. Richard liked her instantly. Michael looked happier than I had seen him in years. Even I felt relieved watching them together. For the first several months, everything seemed perfect. When Michael proposed less than a year later, Richard and I happily contributed money toward the wedding because we genuinely believed they were building a beautiful future together. After the honeymoon, Michael approached us one evening with an uncomfortable smile and explained that housing prices were rising too quickly for them to afford a down payment right away. Just a year or two, he promised. We'll save money and move out as soon as possible. I didn't hesitate for even 1 second. The house had felt painfully quiet after Emily left for college, and part of me missed having a full family under one roof again. I honestly thought opening our home would bring everyone closer together. Instead, it marked the beginning of my slow disappearance. At first, Jessica's changes seemed harmless. She reorganized the kitchen cabinets because she thought it would improve efficiency. She replaced my living room curtains with modern gray ones because the old floral style looked outdated. She created detailed schedules for grocery shopping, cleaning, and family dinners, while cheerfully insisting she was only trying to help. Richard praised her constantly for being organized and proactive. Jessica really knows how to run a household, he would say, admiringly, while I smiled politely, despite the uncomfortable knot growing inside my chest. Slowly, my opinions stopped mattering inside my own home. If I suggested decorating differently for Christmas, Jessica gently overruled me because she wanted a cleaner aesthetic this year. If I planned a quiet family dinner, she turned it into large social gatherings, with coworkers and friends I barely knew. Even conversations changed. At dinner, everyone discussed Jessica's career ideas, Michael's future investments, and Richard's work achievements, while I mostly listened in silence. Whenever I tried contributing, someone interrupted or quickly shifted the subject elsewhere. Richard never noticed. Or maybe he noticed and simply found it easier not to care. The hardest part was how cleverly Jessica disguised control as kindness. She constantly praised me for cooking while quietly making it my permanent responsibility. "Nobody makes meals like Linda," she would smile sweetly while handing me grocery lists and leaving for yoga classes or business meetings. Before long, I was preparing every family dinner, cleaning every room, babysitting grandchildren, and managing endless household tasks, while everyone else lived their lives freely around me. I became useful instead of valued, invisible instead of loved. And somehow, little by little, everyone accepted that version of me as completely normal. Looking back now, I realize losing yourself rarely happens all at once. It happens through tiny compromises repeated over years, until one day you wake up and no longer recognize your own reflection. If this story touches your heart, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories about family betrayal, toxic relationships, and finding the courage to reclaim your life before it's too late. One morning, I realized I had spent nearly 4 straight hours cleaning a house filled with people who barely even looked up when I entered the room. That was the terrifying moment I understood. I was no longer living as part of a family. I was functioning like unpaid staff inside a life I had helped build with my own sacrifices. Every single day followed the same exhausting pattern. I woke before everyone else to prepare breakfast, pack lunches, unload the dishwasher, and organize groceries while the rest of the house remained asleep. By the time Richard came downstairs in his pressed business clothes, coffee would already be waiting for him exactly the way he liked it. Morning, he would mumble distractedly while checking emails on his phone. Sometimes he didn't even look directly at me. Then Jessica would appear perfectly dressed for work or yoga class, offering quick instructions between sips of her smoothie. "Linda, can you pick up Liam from daycare later?" Or, "We're hosting friends Saturday night, so maybe make that lasagna everyone loves." It was never really a request anymore. It was expectation disguised as politeness. The strangest part was how gradually it all happened. Nobody officially announced that I had become responsible for the entire household. It simply evolved that way, because everyone found it convenient. I cooked every meal, because nobody else did it as well. I cleaned because you're home most of the day anyway. I babysat because family should help family. At first, I told myself these things were temporary acts of love, but temporary slowly became permanent. Somewhere along the line, I stopped being treated like Richard's wife and became the household manager. Nobody bothered thanking anymore. Even family gatherings made the difference painfully obvious. During holidays, everyone relaxed in the living room, drinking wine and laughing, while I remained trapped in the kitchen preparing food, washing dishes, and cleaning spills. Sometimes I could hear them discussing vacations or future plans that nobody had even mentioned to me beforehand. Once I walked into the dining room carrying dessert only to realize they had been planning a family ski trip for weeks without inviting me. The conversation stopped awkwardly for a moment before Jessica smiled tightly and explained. "We assumed you probably wouldn't enjoy all the cold weather activities." Richard didn't defend me. He simply stared down at his wine glass in silence. Little moments like that happened constantly. If the grandchildren cried, everyone automatically handed them to me. If groceries needed buying, they called me. If someone wanted fresh towels, snacks, laundry done, or dinner prepared, somehow my name always entered the conversation first. But when it came to vacations, celebrations, important decisions, or simple companionship, I disappeared completely. The emotional exhaustion became unbearable. Some nights I sat alone in the dark kitchen after everyone went to bed, wondering how I had become so invisible inside my own life. I had once been a passionate teacher, with dreams, opinions, and ambitions of my own. Now entire days passed where the only words anyone spoke to me involved chores or favors. Yet somehow, whenever I tried expressing hurt, I was made to feel guilty for even mentioning it. "You're overthinking things, Linda," Richard would sigh. "Everyone appreciates you." But appreciation without respect is just another form of exploitation. And deep down, I think I already knew that, long before I found the courage to leave. If you've ever felt emotionally exhausted from constantly giving while receiving almost nothing in return, comment number 5 below. I want you to know your feelings matter and you deserve to be valued too. For 7 months, I smiled at my family across the dinner table while secretly planning my disappearance. Every casserole I baked, every grandchild I babysat, every polite conversation I forced myself through, hid a truth nobody in that house could even imagine. While they believed I would continue sacrificing myself forever, I was quietly preparing to walk away from all of them. It started on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon after Jessica casually informed me that, since I was home all day anyway, it would make sense for me to handle all future deep cleaning and grocery shopping too. She delivered the statement with a cheerful smile while scrolling through emails on her laptop, completely unaware that something inside me had finally snapped. That same week, I drove 2 towns over and met with a family attorney named Margaret Klein. I remember sitting nervously inside her office, clutching my purse while trying not to cry as I explained everything. The gradual isolation, the emotional neglect, the way my own family had slowly transformed me into unpaid labor inside my own home. Margaret listened carefully without interrupting once. When I finally finished speaking, exhausted and embarrassed, she leaned forward gently and asked one question that changed everything. "Linda, when was the last time someone in that house treated you like your life mattered?" 2. I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out, because the painful truth was that I honestly couldn't remember anymore. Over the next several months, I met with Margaret secretly while pretending to attend volunteer events or visit old friends. Together, we reviewed finances, property records, retirement accounts, and legal ownership documents I hadn't looked at in years. That was when I discovered something shocking. Despite feeling powerless emotionally, I still had far more control over my future than anyone realized. The house remained jointly owned. My retirement savings were protected. The inheritance my parents left me had never been touched. For the first time in years, I felt something dangerous begin returning to life inside me. Hope. Quietly, I started building my escape plan piece by piece. I hired an Somi County, so nobody local would recognize my name. I had the house discreetly appraised while the family thought I was attending gardening workshops. Then one weekend, under the excuse of visiting an old college friend, I drove alone to Asheville, North Carolina. The moment I saw the small white cottage tucked against the mountains, I felt something inside my chest loosen for the first time in years. It wasn't large or luxurious, but it was peaceful. There was a wraparound porch overlooking trees, soft morning light pouring through kitchen windows, and enough silence to finally hear my own thoughts again. I bought the house that same week. Meanwhile, back in Ohio, nobody suspected anything. Richard remained obsessed with his upcoming promotion. Jessica continued reorganizing the household, like a corporate manager running unpaid staff. Michael focused on work and investments. Everyone stayed comfortably distracted, while I quietly dismantled the life they assumed would always belong to them. The hardest part wasn't planning my departure. The hardest part was pretending everything was normal, while carrying the secret alone. Some nights I cried silently in the bathroom, wondering whether I was destroying my family or finally saving myself. But deep down I already knew the answer. Families built on one person's endless sacrifice eventually become prisons, and I could no longer survive inside mine. By the time Richard celebrated his promotion that October night, every document had already been signed. The house sale was finalized. My new home was waiting. I wasn't escaping impulsively. I was reclaiming my life with careful, deliberate courage. After years of forgetting I deserved one of my own. At exactly 8:13 the next morning, my husband unlocked the front door expecting to walk into the same comfortable life he had ignored for years. Instead, within seconds, his entire world began collapsing around him. Richard later told me the first thing he noticed was the silence. No smell of fresh coffee brewing in the kitchen. No sound of dishes being prepared. No quiet movement of someone already awake taking care of everyone else before sunrise. The house felt strangely empty. Jessica walked in behind him carrying her heels in one hand and complaining about a headache from too much wine the night before. Michael and Emily followed close behind after driving separately from the restaurant. They were all laughing until they saw the moving truck parked across the street. "What's going on, Jessica?" asked immediately, her voice tightening with irritation. Richard called my name once casually at first. Linda, no answer. Then he noticed the kitchen table. The ceramic cookie jar still sat in the center exactly where I had left it, but underneath rested a sealed envelope with his name written carefully across the front. Something about the sight instantly unsettled him. He later admitted his hands started shaking before he even opened it. Jessica crossed her arms impatiently, while Michael looked around the room in confusion. Richard slowly unfolded the letter and began reading silently. At first, nobody understood what was happening. Then the color completely drained from his face. What Jessica snapped nervously. "What does it say?" Richard looked up like a man struggling to breathe. "The house," he whispered. "Linda sold the house." The room exploded into chaos. "What do you mean she sold the house?" Michael shouted, grabbing the papers from Richard's hands. Emily stood frozen near the doorway, while Jessica immediately started yelling that this had to be some kind of mistake, but it wasn't. Every document attached to the letter confirmed the truth. The property sale had already closed. The new owners legally took possession at noon that very day. They had less than 4 hours to remove everything they owned from the house. That was when the doorbell rang. A sharply dressed realtor stood outside, beside a smiling middle-aged couple holding folders and coffee cups. "Good morning," the realtor said carefully. "I'm afraid we'll need access for the final walkthrough before transfer of possession." Richard stared at her speechless, while Jessica completely lost control. "You can't just throw us out," she screamed. "This is our home." The realtor remained calm. "Actually, ma'am, the property legally belongs to the Henderson family now." Inside, the kitchen panic spread rapidly. Michael started calling attorneys while Emily burst into tears. Jessica stormed upstairs trying to calculate how much she could pack before noon. But Richard remained standing silently beside the table, rereading my letter over and over again, as if the words physically hurt him. I imagine that was the moment he finally understood something devastating. The woman they all assumed would quietly endure everything forever had reached her limit long ago. She simply stopped asking permission to leave. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, I sat peacefully on the porch of my small cottage in Asheville, watching sunlight spill across the mountains, while my phone filled with desperate calls I never answered. For the first time in years, their chaos no longer belonged to me. And strangely enough, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. If this story shocked you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories about betrayal, family drama, and finding the courage to choose yourself before it's too late. 3 weeks after I disappeared from Ohio, the past finally came knocking on my new front door in Asheville. I was sitting peacefully on the porch that morning, wrapped in a soft sweater, with a cup of coffee, warming my hands when a silver SUV slowly pulled into the driveway. The moment I saw Jessica step out wearing oversized sunglasses and an expensive designer coat completely unsuited for the mountain weather, I knew the piece I had started building was about to be tested. She stood beside the car for a moment, studying my small cottage, with obvious disappointment written across her face. I could almost hear her judgment before she even spoke. This simple little home clearly did not fit the image she believed someone like me should aspire to. Linda, she called while forcing a concerned smile as she walked toward the porch. Thank God we finally found you. I didn't invite her inside. I simply remained seated, calm and quiet, while she climbed the porch steps like she still belonged in my life. How did you find me? I asked softly. Jessica hesitated briefly before answering. Michael hired someone to track your address. Everyone's been worried sick. Worried. The word nearly made me laugh. Nobody had worried while I spent years disappearing inside that family. Nobody worried when I ate dinner alone while they celebrated without me. But now that their comfortable world had collapsed, suddenly, my absence mattered. Jessica removed her sunglasses dramatically and crossed her arms. Richard's barely functioning at work. Michael and Emily are fighting constantly. We had to move into that tiny apartment over the garage. Do you realize what you've done to this family? Her tone sharpened with every sentence until concern disappeared, completely revealing the anger underneath. I took a slow sip of coffee before answering. No, Jessica. I finally realized what this family had done to me. Her expression hardened instantly. That's ridiculous. We gave you purpose. You were needed. Needed. There it was again. Not loved. Not respected. Needed. Useful people are easy to exploit because everyone convinces themselves usefulness should be enough. I looked directly into her eyes for the first time without fear or guilt shrinking me smaller. You didn't want a mother in that house, I said quietly. You wanted free labor that smiled while disappearing. Jessica's face flushed red. You're being selfish. Families help each other. Families also see each other, I replied calmly. And none of you saw me for years. For several long seconds, silence settled heavily between us. Wind moved softly through the trees around the porch, while Jessica struggled to regain control of the conversation. Finally, she lowered her voice and tried a different tactic. Richard's coming tomorrow. He wants to fix things. I almost felt sad hearing that. Not because I wanted him back, but because it was already far too late. There's nothing left to fix, I said honestly. Our marriage ended long before I left Ohio. I just stopped pretending otherwise. Jessica stared at me in disbelief, as if she truly couldn't understand how the quiet woman she once controlled so easily had become someone capable of walking away. But trauma changes people. Sometimes years of silence suddenly transform into boundaries nobody can cross anymore. Eventually, she turned sharply and walked back toward the SUV without another word. I watched her drive away through the trees, then leaned back slowly in my chair. My hands weren't shaking. My chest didn't ache. For the first time in years, standing up for myself no longer felt terrifying. It felt natural, peaceful even. And deep down, I knew I would never surrender that peace again. 1 year after walking away from the family that slowly erased me, I stood barefoot on my porch in Asheville, watching autumn sunlight spill across the Blue Ridge Mountains. And for the first time in decades, my life finally felt like it belonged to me again. The silence around me was no longer lonely. It was peaceful, healing, sacred even. Every morning now began with small rituals that reminded me I was alive instead of simply useful. I brewed coffee in my quiet kitchen, while soft music played in the background. I watered flowers on the porch, waved to neighbors who genuinely smiled when they saw me, and spent afternoons volunteering at the community center, teaching writing classes for women rebuilding their lives after divorce grief or emotional exhaustion. Somewhere between mountain hikes, bookstore visits, and evenings reading beside the fireplace, I slowly found pieces of myself I thought were gone forever. The strangest part was realizing how much my body had changed. Once constant stress disappeared, I slept deeply again. My headaches became rare. I laughed more easily. Friends I made in Asheville often told me I looked younger, lighter somehow, as if years of invisible weight had finally been lifted from my shoulders. And maybe they were right. One chilly October afternoon, my neighbor Evelyn brought over homemade apple cider and handed me an envelope postmarked from Ohio. I recognized Richard's handwriting immediately. For several minutes, I simply stared at the letter resting in my lap, while old memories rose quietly inside me. Eventually, I opened it. Richard wrote that Michael and Jessica had divorced 6 months earlier after endless fighting. Emily had started therapy, and finally admitted how guilty she felt for ignoring me during the years I needed her most. Richard himself had stepped down from the prestigious regional director position he once sacrificed everything to achieve. He said the promotion no longer felt meaningful after losing the family life he believed success was supposed to protect. At the end of the letter, he apologized again. Not with excuses this time, not with promises to fix things, just honesty. "I spent years loving what you did for me instead of loving you properly," he wrote. "I understand that now." I folded the letter slowly and placed it beside the others he had mailed over the past year. I no longer hated Richard. Hate requires emotional energy. I simply didn't want to carry anymore. What I felt instead was acceptance. Some people wake up too late to realize the quiet person holding their entire world together was the most important part of it all along. That realization becomes its own punishment. As the sun lowered behind the mountains, I sat wrapped in a blanket, listening to wind move gently through the trees. My phone buzzed occasionally with messages from my children checking in, trying carefully to rebuild a healthier relationship with me. And while forgiveness takes time, distance had finally allowed all of us to see each other more clearly. Looking back now, I understand something I wish every exhausted woman could hear. Before losing herself completely, love should never require your disappearance. Sacrifice, without appreciation, eventually becomes self-destruction. You are allowed to choose peace. You are allowed to protect your spirit. And it is never too late to reclaim the life, waiting quietly beneath years of neglect and emotional pain. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories about healing self-worth, family betrayal, and finding the courage to finally choose yourself.